working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. The Philippines will not relinquish its territorial claims in the South China Sea. President Marcos Jr. maintained on Tuesday, Zurich time, in an interview with Bloomberg on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. The president emphasized that pursuing diplomatic talks with China to settle the dispute isn't tantamount to abandoning the Philippines' claims to the South China Sea.
Yes, because it was simpler then.
And President Marcos Jr. told World Economic Forum President Borge Brende that he doesn't work for either China and the U.S. This where he was asked about the foreign policy of the Philippines. Former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger told the World Economic Forum in Davos via video link that Russia must be given the opportunity to one day rejoin the international system following any peace deal in Ukraine. And the Asian American Expo kicked off in California. First in our news, an offshore earthquake with a magnitude of 7 hit near eastern Indonesia's Maluku Islands on Wednesday, forcing panicked residents to run into the streets and briefly triggering a tsunami warning. Take a look. Now, there were no immediate efforts or immediate reports of casualties, but light damage was reported on at least one island. The epicenter of the tremor was located 150 kilometers northwest of the eastern Indonesian island of Halmahera at a depth of 48 kilometers, according to the USGS. Now, the undersea quake occurred around 13:06 p.m. local time off the coast of Sulawesi Island, shaking nearby islands and sending some residents into the streets. The NWS Pacific Tsunami Warning Center in Hawaii said in an updated warning the tsunami threat had passed. It said earlier tsunami waves could hit coastal areas around 300 kilometers from the epicenter. The quake was also revised down from an initial magnitude of 7.2 reported by the USGS. Daryono, the head of the agency's Earthquake and Tsunami Center, who, like many Indonesians, goes by one name, said the tremor was followed by 10 aftershocks, the largest with a magnitude of 5.3. The Philippines will not relinquish its territorial claims in the hotly contested South China Sea or West Philippine Sea. President Marcos Jr. maintained on Tuesday, this was Zurich time, in an interview with Bloomberg on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. The president emphasized that pursuing diplomatic talks with China to settle the dispute isn't tantamount to abandoning the country's claims to the West Philippine Sea. This, as Marcos admitted, that breaking the stalemate between the two countries was difficult because the two countries are both reluctant to give up their claims. Take a look.
Oh, that's a difficult thing to have to do because the impasse really has occurred in the application of law, and both sides say that this area belongs. We say it's just a maritime territory of the Philippines, and of course China claims the same, and therefore the application of law is the local law. Is the Chinese side insists that it has to be the Chinese law, the Philippine side the same. We may find a way around that is be limited to exploration, and hopefully I think there's still some give and take possible.
What are the
there.
red lines for the Philippines, and what are the areas you're willing to concede?
Well, we cannot concede any of the territorial claims that are being made against our established territory. So that is the red line. That is something that will not move, and it's something that we cannot cross because it's a very slippery road from there. When I met with President Xi, both in APEC and the state visit that I just had to the People's Republic, I said we have to find a system so that these sort of things do not happen. Because if you look at the we'll call them incidents that have been going on in the past few weeks, months, it really is a very clear indication that there's very poor communication between the two sides. And I suggested, and I think we're going to establish it, is that we'll have a line of communication that is higher up. So that we have already a bilateral group, and so if there is a problem, if there is a decision that needs to be made, my team can call me directly, and the same for the Chinese side.
Just very quickly, President Marcos, I'm just wondering if China does see some of those features, will the U.S. come to your rescue? Will it intervene? Just very quickly.
Well, yes, they have already made that commitment. They have already made that commitment. And as a matter of fact, when there are certain reports that come in, some of the American ships come down and make their presence felt. So that's just we were hoping just keep it, maintain it in that at that level. And we, of course, all of us that are stakeholders, ASEAN, Asia Pacific countries, all just want peace, because we really have a great deal of work to do in recovering our economies.
President Marcos says the Philippine economic growth will likely hold steady at around 7% this year. He credited strong fundamentals that were helping the nation weather shocks and a dimmer global outlook. And the president spoke to Bloomberg News' Haslinda Amin on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Again, let's listen in.
Well, I think we will be able to manage at least 7% for the last year. And we are hoping to exceed, and I think it will happen. We will be able to exceed our projections of 6.5% growth for next year, for this year. And again, we're optimistic that the growth rate can actually go beyond 6.5 and hover maybe around 7%. Because I believe that certainly there is so much space, room to grow, in the sense that we are starting very many new things now, I suppose, like every other economy. And the basics in our economy have been rather stable. Our growth rate has remained above 6.5% for 22, and I think 23 it will be the same situation. Our unemployment rate is continuing to go down. And for that, once I look at the unemployment rate, and so long as the unemployment rate is not at an alarming level, then it's quite likely that you will not have to go through a recession. So that's what we're counting on. The problems, of course, that we face are similar to other countries, and inflation is actually the one thing that we are having to deal with and having to intervene in many ways so that to bring inflation back down.
Inflation at a 14-year high. Onions costing about $11 per kilogram, and the ordinary people are not able to afford that.
Yeah.
What else can you do?
Well, what we've done is we have increased the supply. It's very, very simple. It's really a demand and supply situation. The onions, for example, it's a very simple analysis. You look at our production rate and how much we produce and how much is the demand, and there's no way you have to import. Now, in the long term, however, sugar is we have the same situation. We have to import because our production is not high enough. But the long-term solution, of course, would be to increase production, and that's what we are working on. So these are measures that we are doing. These interventions are, I think, until we get in place the systems that will start to get our production levels up, because there has been the imports, illegal and legal, have been a problem. Mostly the illegal imports that have been going through. And at the very beginning, it was almost impossible for us to determine how many onions there were, how much we had in country, because some of it was smuggled in and we didn't know where they are and what they were, where they came from. So that we've rationalized that now. And our importation schedules are well established and well understood, and all done in keeping with the consultations that we've had with all the stakeholders, including the onion growers in the Philippines.
Right.
Staying in Davos, President Marcos told World Economic Forum President Borge Brende that he doesn't work for either China and the U.S. This where he was asked about the foreign policy of the country. Again, let's listen in.
Yes, because it was simpler then. For example, when you talk about foreign policy for a country like the Philippines, you choose. You were with the Americans or you were with the Soviet Union. That was still the Cold War. We were still in the midst of the Cold War. And so, yes, it was simpler then. But it's that kind of arrangement or that kind of the spheres of influence, as we used to call them, I don't think applies anymore. The forces that are sort of tending to push us back into this bipolar, I mean, not in a psychiatric sense, but bipolar world are quite strong. Yeah. But I think most leaders and most strategists have a consensus that we should not fall back into that kind of situation where all countries have to choose which side they will be on. So when asked which side are you on, I said, well, I don't work for Beijing. I don't work for Washington, D.C. I work for the Philippines. So I'm on the side of the Philippines. And that really translates into a very simple statement of foreign policy, which is I promote the national interest.
And the national interest...
Meanwhile, former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger told the World Economic Forum in Davos via video link that Russia must be given the opportunity to one day rejoin the international system following any peace deal in Ukraine. The former statesman also said that Russia's invasion shows there is no longer a point to keeping Ukraine out of NATO, the long-held aspiration of Kiev that he had opposed. Let's listen in.
Before this war, I was opposed to membership of Ukraine in NATO because I feared that it would start exactly the process that we are seeing now. Now that this process has reached this level, the idea of a neutral Ukraine under these conditions is no longer meaningful. The United States has supported Ukrainian resistance, should continue to support, and if necessary, intensify its military support until this ceasefire line is either reached or accepted in some preliminary discussions. And another purpose of this is to keep the war from becoming a war against Russia itself, to give Russia an opportunity to rejoin an international system. This may seem very hollow to nations that have been under Russian pressure for much of the post-war period. But the new conditions that I have described may cause Russia to reevaluate its historic position, which was an amalgam of an attraction to the culture of Europe and a fear of domination by Europe, because the destruction of Russia as a state that can pursue its own policies will open up the vast area of its 11 time zones to internal conflict and to outside intervention at the time when there are 15,000 and more nuclear weapons on its territory.
Now, in this 30-minute conversation with his former student, Harvard professor Allison Kissinger also said that Western sanctions would have to remain in place for the entirety of peace negotiations that should follow the ceasefire. He also said he wanted to express admiration for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the heroic conduct of the Ukrainian people. Now, Mr. Kissinger was Secretary of State between 1973 and 77 under Presidents Nixon and Ford, and served as National Security Advisor between 1969 and 1975. He was a key part of the U.S. detente with the Soviet Union and rapprochement with China, and oversaw hugely controversial decisions, including bombing and military operations in Cambodia. Now, the Bulusan volcano is now back to normal level, or alert level 0, according to the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology. In an advisory on Wednesday night, PHIVOC said the observational parameters have returned to baseline or background levels. No magmatic eruption is also foreseen in the immediate future, prompting PHIVOC to lower the volcano's alert status. Since the first week of December, PHIVOC has been recording 0 to 5 earthquakes at Bulusan volcano per day. Most of these earthquakes occurred at a shallow depth of less than 10 kilometers beneath the edifice. Despite Bulusan volcano being back to its normal state, the entry into the 4-kilometer radius permanent danger zone, particularly near the vents on the southeastern slopes, should be avoided due to the possibility of sudden and hazardous steam-driven or phreatic eruption, rockfall, and landslide. Aviation authorities are urged to advise pilots to avoid flying close to the volcano summit, as ash from any sudden phreatic eruption can be hazardous to aircraft. In tonight's other news, a top mafia boss who was Italy's most wanted fugitive is in custody after 30 years on the run. Matteo Messina Denaro was arrested in a medical clinic in Sicily where he was getting treatment. Denaro now faces multiple life sentences after being convicted of dozens of murders. Mia San Vicente reports from Italy.
Italian anti-mafia police caught Sicilian fugitive godfather Matteo Messina Denaro on Monday, ending a 30-year manhunt for Italy's most wanted mobster. The 60-year-old was arrested after visiting a health clinic in the Sicilian capital Palermo, where he was being treated for colon cancer.
Oggi, 16 gennaio 2023, i carabinieri del ROS, del GIS e dei comandi territoriali della Regione Sicilia, nell'ambito delle indagini coordinate dalla Procura della Repubblica di Palermo, hanno tratto in arresto il latitante Matteo Messina Denaro all'interno di una struttura sanitaria dove si era recato per sottoporsi a delle terapie cliniche.
In 2015, police discovered he was communicating with his closest collaborators via the Pizzini system, where tiny, folded paper notes were left under a rock at a farm in Sicily. Messina Denaro had been #1 on Italy's most wanted list, but the only known photo of him dated back to the early 1990s. Among other crimes, Messina Denaro was convicted in absentia of being behind the 1993 bombings in Rome, Milan, and Florence that killed 10 people. He was also convicted for the murder of a teenager who was strangled and dissolved in acid after his father turned state witness. According to anti-mafia investigators, he had been an active boss for the Trapani region beyond his territory, including in the resolution of disputes and top mafia appointments. He was well-dressed and sported an expensive watch when he was arrested. He was then transported by military helicopter to the central eastern region of Abruzzo, where officials said he would be jailed in the high-security prison in L'Aquila. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni hailed the great victory against the most significant mafia boss and immediately headed to Palermo to congratulate officials in person. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said Messina Denaro was the most significant mafia boss, and his arrest in his native Sicily was a great victory for the state in its war against organized crime.
Per me questo giorno rappresenta la fine di Cosa Nostra. Finalmente si è chiuso un ciclo. Ieri, non a caso, Era i 30 anni dell'arresto di Rina, oggi l'arresto di Messina Denaro. La mafia è finita, la vecchia mafia è finita, la vecchia mafia stragista che ha messo a terra questo paese.
Reporting from Rome, Italy, this is Mia San Vicente Abad, reminding you to stay alert because we live in extraordinary times.
Thanks, Mia. Meanwhile, Asian American Expo kicked off in California. This year's event, which saw a record turnout of over 100,000 visitors at one point, is the 41st annual Asian American Expo to take place in Los Angeles. Here's Eva and Alan Basilyahe.
Welcome, Net 25!
In its 41st year, the Asian American Expo continues to bring together the richness of Asian cultures.
From performances, anime, and sneakers, this expo stretches out over 7 exposition halls and outdoor pavilions.
A lot of hours, a lot of time we contribute in the practice. So for this dancing, actually, we are practicing every week and every day for more than 1 hour. Recently 2 months to practice those programs. Also for this dress, so we do the happy and the celebration, and the other one we did this one because California is need raining, so we use the umbrella. We did the umbrella this dancing.
Taiko is a Japanese word. It's 2 combinations of kanji characters or Chinese characters. And so there's the word tai, which means big, and then ko, which is like a sound or a drum. So taiko literally means drum, like big drum. Taiko is a very fun musical activity. It's also an athletic activity. So as you notice, we're in a stance, like we're kind of grounding ourselves so that we can be ready to hit the drum. Because when you hit the drum, it hits back, and if you're not in a good stance, like you're gonna fall. So if you like to be athletic, if you're musical, or if you want to try music, I would say that drumming is a very good opportunity to get started.
We want to showcase the beauty and culture of Chinese culture, and we want to demonstrate the diversity of American. As Asian American, we are proud of our heritage.
We can see a lot of performing and different kinds of performing. You see it's like I have a Chinese dragon, and for Chinese dance, Americans, so we need, everybody happy to live here. So we need to let other people know our culture. So it's just like other nationally have their own culture. We need to let them know our culture.
Checking out every attraction and vendor in just one day is a pretty tall order. There's just too many of them.
Fortunately, the Asian American Expo is set to return in 2024. And for those of you keeping count, that'll be year 42 for this event.
Eva and Allen, Pomona, California, Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
Thanks, Eva and Alan. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note.